problem is in the international environmental world, there's not a whole lot of concrete things to use. And even if it's concrete, then a lot of times it's unsatisfactory in terms of one, your ability to use it, or two, your ability to get the right decision to actually get any concrete action out of it. So, from my perspective, it's important to understand all those and then really be creative in how they're used in order to achieve what they're trying to achieve. There's none of them really satisfactory, but we have what we have, and we'd all like something better. But to have something better, people are working on things better, which is all good stuff. But we got to take the world as it exists sometimes and deal with the tools that we have. So that's sort of my philosophy, is try to get people to understand there are some tools out there. They're not perfect. They're the tools we have. How can we best use them to achieve what we're trying to achieve?
Legal creativity also.
Yes.
Force critical mass, but Jim's presentation was sort of addressing some of the things we're talking about. Maybe we could still all stay here, close together at the table, but still.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I wanted to suggest that as well, because I think you also have a commitment at some point.
Unfortunately, yeah, we're co-organizing an event that starts at 11 back at the other campus, so I should probably leave.
Yeah, exactly. So either if we want to do a formal presentation, we can still do that. I mean, we have all the documents, and or whatever you wish, you can also bring it.
If I printed it out, I would, but since I haven't,
Okay.
I'll probably need a prompt.
Yeah, okay. Then we
if
can
that's
still
something
stay
like
here,
that.
and we can put it on screen, and then we just run through it a little bit in a more informal way. But did that a little bit clarify this positive zone?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I mean, at least where we are coming from, where it's heading, you know, what
Yeah.
the overall idea, concept,
I'll
and the subject. You know.
see throughout presentations or discussions where the leading points exactly are, or what I can learn as a lawyer, let's say.
Yeah.
From it. Because in say the steps seem logical. And yesterday I already attended a session with Rodney on the enforcement of rights, so I already know that story, let's say, more or less. Discussed it in the Knowledge Cafe. But in the afternoon, is someone, I see Rob Fowler or Nilofer, are they coming to?
Yeah. I mean, the participants have all committed, and they will come. The co-organizers. Yeah, exactly. Partners, participants were a bit on the other hand.
Yeah,
Putting it. Okay. Screen.
Yeah, I'm fine. Is there a... oh.
We don't need a microphone.
Do you
No.
have the mouse
To-
to advance the slide?
Or we say just next. And you can click it. If we say next, then you go to next slide.
We don't have anything controversial.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I'm here representing a consortium called the Conservation Initiative on Human Rights. It brings together 8 international conservation organizations. Those are all up there, so it includes WWF, IUCN, Conservation International, the Nature Conservancy, Wildlife Conservation Society, BirdLife International, Wetlands International, and Fauna and Flora International. And in another slide, I'll tell you a little bit about how it was those organizations. Let's skip over this. Okay, so just a little bit of information about the context for the initiative. I think there are 2 points on this. One of them is context sort of out in the world, which was the growing recognition of the links between conservation and human rights. Many years, conservationists didn't necessarily have a high level of awareness about the relevance of human rights to conservation, but I would say over the last several years, that's been changing, and there's been growing recognition of the links. And they've operated in a number of directions. So, for example, the recognition that healthy ecosystems contribute to the realization of rights, and so that actually the conservation work is able to is in a position to contribute to human rights. On the kind of flip side of that, secure rights also contributes to conservation outcomes. So, Harry was mentioning a minute ago, land and resource rights. There's a lot of evidence that security of tenure is an important foundation for effective community-based conservation. On the negative side, then exclusionary approaches to conservation can also infringe on rights. And related to that, where the rights aren't recognized, you're trying to do conservation activities, you're often going to run into conflicts that actually impede how effective conservation outcomes are going to be. A second context for the initiative was more internal among these groups. As I mentioned earlier, we had a shared interest and concern to strengthen and expand our work on rights issues. I would say in two dimensions. One is on respecting and supporting and defending rights in practice, so through rights-based approaches, through our programs and policy work. And then the other one is a little more internally facing, and we're looking at development of institutional policies and measures to mainstream non-food organization through, say, impact assessments and monitoring and other kinds of tools. And then an overall recognition that among all of our organizations we have a lot of common number of needs, and that we could advance our work more effectively and faster if we can pull together those. So the specific background to the initiative, it actually was launched, or the germ of the idea was planted at a meeting of a group called the Conservation CEOs Forum, which brings together the 8 organizations that are now the participating organizations of CIHR. So the CEOs of those groups, it's a somewhat informal thing, but they try to meet periodically, and they discuss a range of topics that are of common interest to international conservation organizations. And IIED at one of those meetings gave a presentation on, they were focusing more particularly on social accountability issues at that point to that group. And following that, the CEO said, well, yes, this is something we should look at. It's useful to look at this collectively. And they appointed like a staff task force, each organization appointed a person to follow the issue. We then got reconvened in 2008, and IIED was providing technical support at that time. IIED is the International Institute for Environmental Development based in the UK. And we sat down together and we thought, okay, well, what should be our common goal? And we decided that this language here improve the practice of conservation by ensuring that participating organizations integrate human rights into their work. And we had a workshop in 2009 where we brought together representatives of all of our organizations along with human rights experts and experts in social accountability issues. And based on that, we developed what we call the Conservation and Human Rights Framework. That was drafted in 2009. So this is actually what the Conservation and Human Rights Framework says. It includes 4 common principles. One of them is to, and they're quite high level, you'll see. One of them is to respect human rights, respect international and human rights, and make sure we don't contribute to infringements of rights. The second is to more proactively to promote human rights within the context of our conservation programs. And so that gets more into our rights-based approaches, more active sense. The third principle is to protect the vulnerable, recognizing that vulnerable populations are especially vulnerable to infringements of their rights, and that needs to be given special attention. And then the fourth principle is to encourage good governance, and that points to recognition of the need to, rights are primary responsibility of states. It's about the relationship of states to their citizens, and you need to work at a national level on public policies and governance in order for conservation in other contexts. Then as far as, we also adopted a set of implementation measures. So, these high-level principles, but they're also concrete things that we thought to do at an organizational level to implement them. So one of them is more broadly just further developing these principles and measures in consultation over time, recognizing that this is going to be iterative and it should be a living sort of a framework. The second one is to establish relevant institutional policies. A number of the participating organizations have specific policies related to rights issues. For example, WWF has had a policy on Indigenous peoples and conservation since 1996. CI also has an Indigenous peoples policy. WCS has a policy on conservation-related displacement. So different organizations have different policies, but recognizing that establishing institutional policies is a really important tool for rights mainstream in our organizations. A second implementation measure was to ensure implementation capacity is in place, so that means identifying focal points, having internal expertise and dedicated capacity to work through our programs and through our institutions to embed the policies we adopt. The fourth one is to address conservation human rights links in the design, implementation, and monitoring of programs. I think there's a great intersection here with the rights-based approach, the stepwise approach as you've laid it out. And this is really thinking kind of operationally in terms of the process of how you design and implement and monitor programs. How can you make sure that rights issues are addressed, for example, through upfront impact assessment, etc. The fifth implementation measure is to establish accountability measures. So that includes both, the kind of internal processes of including the policy principles in program monitoring, but also external mechanisms like grants, resolution procedures, and then finally to apply principles and work with implementing partners. So basically the development of that conservation human rights framework and the adoption of that framework, or in a couple of cases a adapted version of it, was really the main outcome of a first phase of discussions over 2008 and 2009. And then by early 2010, all of the organizations who originally kind of sat around the table had adopted, at least 6 of us adopted a common version of them, and then BirdLife and WCS felt that they needed to make some adjustments to reflect their organizational structures. But everyone had adopted a conservation human rights framework by early 2010, and at that point we came back together and we said, okay, well, we've done this. Is it still useful to work together? Are there still things that we do collectively, or is it really now a matter of us just taking these principles and implementation measures and moving forward within our own organizations? And we decided that there was actually still some value to working together as a group for reasons that I've already mentioned. And so we sat down together and we decided we would do a first 3-year program of work following these principles. The first 2 really relate back to the framework, developing and maintaining a set of human rights principles, identifying as well as testing the measures for implementing them. And then I'd say the next objectives have really then become the main focus of the work we've been doing since about the middle of 2010, which are supporting the participating organizations in implementing these principles and implementation measures through shared learning with also other stakeholders and experts. A fourth objective is to promote rights-based approaches more broadly through some collective activities in our field programs, as well as by trying to influence broader thinking and practice in the fora like this. We actually had a CIHR sponsored event yesterday, a workshop in the ICC on human rights and indigenous peoples and and then the fifth is to report on members' activities and putting in place those implementation measures. So that's kind of the initial set of reporting activity that just is a way of tracking how we're all doing, sharing information on how we're all doing in relation to this. A Okay, so results to date, I've kind of already kind of covered that. It was really development of the framework and adoption of it. In terms of shared learning, so in November 2010, one of the first activities that we sponsored together was a scoping workshop with rights, indigenous, and development experts on conservation and human rights issues. And then through those discussions and some additional research, we produced a scoping paper, which is this one here, on human rights. It's called Conservation and Human Rights, Key Issues and Contexts. And the next two slides go into a local. So yeah, so basically, this is meant to be kind of an basically an information resource for conservation organizations on rights issues and how they relate to conservation. So it gives the framework of international human rights instruments. It talks about human rights in particular relevance to conservation, substantive rights, procedural rights, indigenous people's rights, and emerging issues. And then most of the paper focuses on what we call key issues. And these are the issues we felt come up most frequently or commonly, the intersection of human rights and conservation work. And so some of the issues that were included there were participation in decision making, free-part informed consent, conflicts between customary and statutory tenure, biocultural diversity, sustainable development and benefit sharing, displacement and access restrictions, and law enforcement. And again, I would say, a lot of our organizations, the main type of work that we do is implementation and supports implementation of conservation programs in the field. So we're really trying to get to that practical element of, what are the issues that come up in the practical context where we're working. And then the paper also provides some information on what might be some guiding principles for work on these issues, and then practical approaches, including drawing on the experience of our own organizations and others, and how to address these kinds of issues in conservation programs. And then we also outlined a number of what we call key contexts in which these issues arise. So, of course, protected areas, historically the most sort of fraught issue, climate mitigation, REDD+, as well as adaptation, community-based natural resource management, more on a positive way, but also some potential for interventions, species conservation, and then private sector quality certification work, which a number of our organizations are involved in. So then going back, picking up the list of results to date, so that was an important shared learning activity that we sponsored as a group. We've also, individual members of the CIHR have had meetings and workshops for their own staff, and we've sent representatives from the others to those so as to be able to exchange, and also, like, so for example, I've gone to the CI and TNC workshops to talk about what WWF is doing and things. The fourth objective is promoting rights-based approaches more broadly. I would say one of the main activities that we did on that was looking at, so we had highlighted REDD+ as one of the key contexts in which rights issues emerge. So we jointly sponsored a workshop this January in Lima on rights-based approaches to REDD, and again brought together representatives from our organizations, from indigenous peoples organizations, from development organizations, to really share, exchange some of the emerging experience from both field level pilots as well as efforts to shape national REDD+ strategies, and to try to learn from that experience about how to ensure that those activities are rights-based and promote rights-based approaches. We've also sponsored a range of dialogue activities in international fora. So I mentioned yesterday we had a high-level dialogue in the main ICC setting. So, for example, the president of CI was there, WWF, the leader of our Amazon initiative, where, of course, indigenous issues are very relevant. Julia was there, the representative Koika from the Amazon Indigenous Federation, and from the African Human Rights Commission and others who to talk about the synergies and ways that conservation, human rights, and indigenous constituencies can better work together. We've also sponsored dialogues in other settings, the expert mechanism on the rights of Indigenous peoples in CBD, UCNC meetings, the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous issues, and we'll continue to do that. We started a website, the address is there, conservationrights.org. And then the fifth objective, in relation to the fifth objective, reporting on members' activities, we designed a relatively simple template for reporting activities against the implementation measures. We've done a first year of those that are posted on the website. Yeah, so this is the last slide. Basically, we're going to, we're moving forward with all of these different lines of work. Shared learning activities on concrete, right-based approaches in concrete areas, as well as the implementation measures. In particular, one issue that we'd like to focus on is accountability mechanisms. This is something that there's a lot of interest, but I think it's something that's still relatively new for NGOs in general. So actually, we could ask some help from the Environmental Law Center to do a survey of experiences out there of other organizations that we could learn from. And